Imagine living in a world where your freedoms are taken away, where one leader controls everything, and where dissent is crushed with violence. Hard to picture, right? But that's exactly what happened in the early 20th century. Fascism, a political ideology that promotes extreme nationalism and authoritarian rule, took hold in countries like Italy and Germany, and it led to some of the darkest moments in human history. Did you know that 60 million people died during World War II, much of it due to the rise of fascist regimes? Or that Hitler's Nazi party started with just 5,000 members in 1920, but by 1933, it controlled the government and led Germany into totalitarian rule? Fascism doesn't just happen overnight. It grows quietly, often fueled by fear, division, and a desire for power. In this video, we'll dive into the strategies fascists use to seize control, why people are drawn to these extreme ideas, and whether we're seeing signs of fascism making a comeback today. We'll uncover how fascist leaders manipulate the masses with propaganda, violence, and promises of a better future, no matter the cost. It's time to understand this dangerous ideology before history repeats itself. Stay tuned to see why fascism still matters today, and how we can fight it. Chapter 1: The Rise of the Beast. How fascism began. Fascism didn't appear out of nowhere. It grew out of the wreckage of World War I, a time when countries were battered, economies were broken, and people were scared. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, placed harsh penalties on Germany, making the country feel humiliated and angry. This feeling of resentment created fertile ground for radical ideas. Leaders like Benito Mussolini in Italy and Adolf Hitler in Germany promised to restore national pride and power. Mussolini's rise to power in 1922 marked the first successful fascist regime. His black shirts used violence and intimidation to crush opposition. Mussolini wasn't alone in using fear to control his people. In Germany, Hitler's Nazi party followed a similar playbook, but with a much more extreme racial ideology. Hitler's early life as a soldier in World War I shaped his worldview, and the harsh conditions of the war made him believe that only a strong, centralized power could restore order. Fascism didn't just grow because of external enemies, but internal strife as well. In Germany, the Weimar Republic faced economic collapse during the Great Depression. People were losing jobs, and families were starving. Hitler capitalized on this pain by promising a return to greatness. His message? Make Germany great again. Sound familiar? Fascists often thrive in times of crisis, offering simple answers to complex problems. In Italy, Mussolini's government quickly adopted aggressive policies. He controlled the media, stifled free speech, and used propaganda to sell his ideas. Fascist propaganda often portrayed the leader as a savior, someone who could unite the nation. The central idea was that only a strong, authoritarian government could protect the country from chaos. The rise of fascism wasn't just about military power. It was about control of the people's hearts and minds. Mussolini once said, "Fascism is the marriage of the state and the people." This meant that fascists worked to replace individual freedoms with collective loyalty to the state. Fascism spreads quickly in times of fear, but it also thrives on disillusionment. People who felt powerless or ignored by traditional governments found a new sense of hope in these strongmen. The promise of restoring national pride and offering a clear enemy to blame gave people a sense of purpose. And that was exactly what fascism needed to spread. Chapter 2: What is fascism? Decoding the ideology. Fascism is more than just an authoritarian form of government. It's an ideology that centers around the belief that the state is the highest authority. Fascists reject the notion of individualism and democracy. They believe that the nation must be united under a single, strong leader who represents the will of the people. One of the core beliefs of fascism is ultranationalism. Fascists see the nation as superior to others and believe that the people must work together to achieve greatness. This can often lead to an aggressive form of nationalism, where outsiders are seen as threats. In Hitler's case, this meant targeting Jews, Romani people, and anyone seen as a racial or cultural enemy. Fascism also thrives on authoritarianism. Leaders like Mussolini and Hitler believed that the state should control every aspect of life, from the economy to the media to education. They didn't believe in personal freedoms, and they didn't tolerate dissent. Everything within the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state, Mussolini famously said. This idea of total control is a defining characteristic of fascist regimes. Another key component of fascism is the cult of the leader. Fascists idolize their leaders, turning them into almost godlike figures. In Nazi Germany, Hitler was portrayed as the Führer, the ultimate authority. His image was everywhere, on posters, in schools, even in people's homes. Mussolini used similar tactics in Italy, calling himself Il Duce, or the leader. This personality cult is essential for maintaining loyalty and devotion to the fascist cause. Fascism is also rooted in militarism. Fascist governments believe in building powerful, aggressive militaries that can expand the nation's borders or crush internal dissent. The idea of a strong military serves as a symbol of the nation's power and unity. It also helps the regime suppress opposition by creating a sense of fear and intimidation. At its core, fascism is about control of the nation, control of the people, and control of the narrative. It's an ideology that thrives on division, fear, and manipulation. While fascism is often associated with the 20th century, its appeal is not limited to the past. Fascism continues to attract followers in times of social, political, and economic uncertainty. Chapter 3: The Fascist Toolbox, Tactics and Strategies. Fascists use a variety of tactics to gain and maintain power. One of the most important tools in their toolbox is propaganda. In Nazi Germany, Joseph Goebbels, the Minister of Propaganda, understood the power of media. He once said, "The most brilliant propagandist technique will yield no success unless one fundamental principle is borne in mind constantly. It must confine itself to a few points and repeat them over and over." Goebbels crafted a message that was simple, repetitive, and effective, helping Hitler gain mass support. Violence is another key tactic. Fascists often use violence to intimidate their political opponents and suppress dissent. Mussolini's black shirts were notorious for attacking anyone who opposed his government. In Nazi Germany, the SA, Sturmabteilung, used similar tactics, attacking Jews, communists, and other perceived enemies of the state. This fear and violence were used to create a climate of terror, where no one dared to speak out. Censorship plays a huge role in fascist regimes. In order to maintain control over the narrative, fascist governments eliminate independent media and free speech. In Mussolini's Italy, newspapers were tightly controlled by the state, and only pro-fascist content was allowed. In Nazi Germany, books that were considered UN German were burned in massive public bonfires. Censorship helps prevent any form of opposition from reaching the masses. Another tactic is creating a common enemy. Fascists often unify the population by blaming an outside group for the nation's problems. Hitler blamed the Jews for Germany's defeat in World War I and for the country's economic troubles. This scapegoating provides a sense of focus, creating a common enemy that unites the people under the banner of nationalism. Fascists are also masters of divide and conquer. By encouraging internal divisions, whether along political, social, or racial lines, they weaken the opposition. In Germany, Hitler exploited tensions between different social classes and used the rhetoric of class warfare to appeal to the working class, while also courting wealthy industrialists. This strategy keeps the public divided, making it easier for fascists to maintain control. Finally, fascists excel at manipulating the economy. While fascists are often seen as anti-communist, they aren't necessarily against state control of the economy. In Nazi Germany, for example, the state played a huge role in shaping economic policy, directing resources toward military production and large infrastructure projects like the Autobahn. By controlling the economy, fascists can create the illusion of prosperity and gain support from both workers and businesses. Fascist tactics are calculated, manipulative, and effective. They use fear, propaganda, and violence to create a climate where dissent is dangerous, and loyalty to the leader is essential. This combination of strategies makes fascism an appealing choice for leaders seeking absolute control. If you want to dive deeper into these strategies, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more in-depth content. Chapter 4: Fascism's Appeal. Why people buy into it. Why do people support fascism, even when its methods are harsh and oppressive? One reason is fear. In times of crisis, such as economic downturns or social unrest, people look for a sense of security. Fascist leaders like Hitler and Mussolini presented themselves as strong figures who could restore order. In the wake of the Great Depression, Hitler's promises to rebuild the economy and provide jobs made him appealing to millions of Germans desperate for stability. In fact, by 1936, Germany's unemployment rate dropped dramatically, from 6 million in 1932 to just under 1 million, largely thanks to state-funded projects. Another reason fascism gains traction is the desire for national pride. Many people are drawn to fascism's focus on making the nation great again. Mussolini used the phrase, "Mussolini is always right," to promote confidence in his leadership. Fascism often promotes a vision of national unity where all citizens work for the common good, even if it means sacrificing individual rights. In times of uncertainty, people may prefer this vision of unity over the chaos of a fractured society. Nationalism also plays a major role in fascism's appeal. Fascists often tap into a strong sense of national identity, using symbols, language, and rituals to foster loyalty. In Nazi Germany, symbols like the swastika and rallies such as Nuremberg created a sense of belonging. These rituals reminded people of their shared heritage and instilled pride in the nation's power. Fascists take advantage of this deep sense of patriotism, framing themselves as defenders of the nation against outside threats. Then, there's economic desperation. In the 1920s and 1930s, many European countries were economically struggling. Mussolini's fascist regime in Italy promised a solution by stabilizing the economy through state intervention. Similarly, the Nazi regime introduced massive public works programs, including the famous Autobahn, that employed millions and helped stimulate the economy. The fact that fascists often deliver tangible economic results makes them attractive to people looking for immediate change. Scapegoating is another powerful tool that fascists use to unite people. When life is difficult, people often seek someone to blame. Fascists are adept at directing public anger towards certain groups. Hitler blamed the Jews for Germany's defeat in World War I and for the country's economic troubles. This scapegoating provides a sense of focus, creating a common enemy that unites the people under the banner of nationalism. Fascism also appeals because it offers certainty in uncertain times. Democracies can feel messy and slow, especially when economic crises or wars are involved. Fascists, on the other hand, promise quick solutions and decisive leadership. Mussolini claimed that, under fascism, everything in the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state, ensuring clear direction and control. Chapter 5, Echoes in the Present. Is fascism rising again? It's a frightening thought. Could fascism be making a comeback? Many historians and political scientists have raised alarms about the rise of populism and authoritarianism around the world today. While we might not see the same level of violence or military conquests as in the 20th century, certain signs suggest a worrying trend. The most obvious sign of fascism's return is strongman politics. Leaders who promise to restore national greatness through forceful leadership are increasingly popular. In Hungary, Viktor Orban has been accused of undermining democracy and centralizing power, using rhetoric that resonates with fascist ideals. Similarly, Brazil's Jair Bolsonaro and the United States' Donald Trump have been criticized for using divisive language and questioning the legitimacy of elections. These leaders often portray themselves as saviors, promising to clean up corruption and restore pride. Another alarming development is the rise of extreme nationalism. Nationalist movements are on the rise across Europe, with groups advocating for closed borders, anti-immigrant policies, and a return to traditional values. In countries like Poland and Italy, nationalists have gained significant political power. These movements often use the same playbook as historical fascists, using fear of outsiders to rally their supporters. This nationalism is often accompanied by xenophobia and racism, similar to the rhetoric that fueled fascism in the 1930s. Social media plays a huge role in this resurgence. Platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube allow populist and far-right leaders to spread their messages directly to millions of people. Social media enables the rapid spread of misinformation, creating echo chambers where only certain viewpoints are heard. It also allows fascist groups to organize quickly, share propaganda, and attract followers. A 2021 report found that extremist groups in the US used social media platforms to amplify their messages and recruit new members. However, fascism today is not as overt as it was in the 1930s. Political correctness and human rights norms make open advocacy of fascist ideas socially unacceptable. Instead, modern fascists often disguise their views under a veil of populism, appealing to mainstream political discourse while pushing extremist policies. For example, Hungary's Orban uses terms like a liberal democracy to describe his government, a phrase that downplays the authoritarian nature of his rule. The globalization backlash is another reason why fascist ideas are gaining traction. As the world becomes more interconnected, some people feel left behind. Global trade and immigration can create economic uncertainty, leading to fears about job loss and cultural erosion. In countries like the US, Brexit in the UK, and Italy, these fears have fueled anti-globalization sentiments, which fascists are quick to exploit. Finally, there's the growing concern over democratic backsliding. Countries that were once democratic are showing signs of authoritarianism. In countries like Turkey and Poland, democratic institutions are being weakened. Judges are being replaced with political loyalists, independent media outlets are shut down, and protests are met with violence. This erosion of democratic norms mirrors the early stages of fascism. Chapter 6, Fighting Fascism. What can we do? Fighting fascism isn't just about resisting oppressive governments, it's about creating strong, democratic societies that are resilient to authoritarianism. So, what can we do to prevent fascism from taking root again? First and foremost, education is key. Teaching people about the dangers of fascism and authoritarianism can help prevent its rise. In countries like Germany, schools teach students about the Holocaust and the dangers of totalitarianism. This helps to instill a sense of vigilance and understanding. As historian Timothy Snyder writes in On Tyranny, the most important thing we can do is remember. Teaching history helps us understand how easily fascism can take hold, and why we must remain vigilant. Another way to fight fascism is through voting. It sounds simple, but one of the best defenses against fascism is a robust, functioning democracy. By participating in free and fair elections, citizens ensure that power remains in the hands of the people. In the US, midterm elections in 2018 showed that voter turnout was higher than in previous years, signaling that many citizens are committed to preserving democracy. Solidarity is also critical in resisting fascism. We must stand up for marginalized groups who are often the first targets of fascist movements. Whether it's advocating for racial minorities, immigrants, or LGBTQ+ individuals, showing solidarity with these groups helps build a united front against fascism's divisive tactics. Finally, resisting hate speech and propaganda is vital. Social media platforms must do more to prevent the spread of false information and extremist content. It's also essential to call out hate speech when we see it, whether it's online or in person. People who spread fascist ideas rely on silence to spread their message, breaking that silence is one of the most powerful ways to resist. Fighting fascism takes effort, but it's possible. It starts with understanding the warning signs, staying engaged in politics, and protecting the values that make democracy strong. We may not be able to eliminate fascism entirely, but we can create a world where it's much harder to thrive. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you can stay updated with our future videos about the rise and fall of dangerous ideologies.